Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Off the Scribe podcast. Don't forget to comment, subscribe, and like. Leave a like in the video if you're listening on audio on Google Podcasts. Don't forget to leave a review, a 5-star review or more, no less. And I'm going to introduce my guest, who is an author, science fiction. Well, you'll hear it from his own mouth. So, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me. This is, I think, the first time I've been on a podcast where my interviewer is 6,000 or more miles away. My name is Phil Cohen. I am and have been for quite some time. I was talking about this with a colleague this morning. I'm a rabbi of the Reform stream, and in that regard, I've done all kinds of work on the pulpit, in the college classroom, in the high school classroom, and the college campus as a Hillel director. But about 10 years ago, I got interested in writing fiction and found my way to getting a Master of Fine Arts degree. Excuse me, and along the way, I started writing fiction, short stories and novels. About a little less than 2 years ago, I had my first novel published called Nick Bones Underground. And I describe it as a Jewish science fiction detective novel. It has all three of those elements. It's definitely science fiction, takes place in an imagined future not that long off. And it's a detective novel in the sense that it utilizes some of the typical tropes of detective novels, and there are Jewish themes in there. There's a computer, an AI computer that's crossed over into humanity, into being human, who wants to be Jewish, for example. And this raises all kinds of conversations between her and the protagonist of the novel, who is Jewish but has become, though he had a yeshiva education through high school, has become unreligious. So that book's been out. It's gotten some good reviews. I'm working on the sequel. And beyond that, I have some other ideas which may not be strictly science fiction, but it's something that I really enjoy doing, and maybe we can talk about both the business and the art of writing fiction. That's more than 50 words, but I'm done.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I'll give you a kind of a permission to go over the prescribed amount of words, but I'll start by asking you. Let's start from the beginning, shall we say? Your titular years. Where did you formed? What was your education like? Why did you want to become an author? And we'll move on from there. Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't know where exactly in my life I should pick up, but the first question, I actually am going to ask a question back to you, which maybe you should ask on camera. Now, since you're an Israeli, are you finding that most of your listeners are Israeli, or do you have an international listenership?
No, it's mixed. It's mixed. I would say perhaps 30% maybe Israeli and 70 kind of worldwide listeners. Okay. Yeah.
All right. So I'll start I'll get to the why I'm a writer, wanted to be a writer part pretty quickly, but I want to start in 1974. February of 1974, I came to Israel for the first time, and my intention, I graduated from college, and it's my intention to go volunteer on a kibbutz. I had this idea about meeting a nice, comely volunteer and picking pears at 4 a.m. But I go to the hotel, the wall, as most tourists did and do, and this guy in a black coat comes up to me, black coat and a black hat, and he says, "How would you like to come study in my yeshiva?" Well, one thing led to another, and I ended up at the yeshiva for not very long, under 2 months. But for under 2 months, I led an Orthodox Jewish life, and found that I was extraordinarily challenged by Judaism, and of course, in particular, Orthodox Judaism, because the way I grew up, I knew that Judaism existed, but my engagement was extraordinarily trivial. So I left that yeshiva experience really challenged to understand, wanting to understand far more about Judaism, about Israel. This was right after the Yom Kippur War, and Israel was very much licking its wounds in early 1974. And in fact, I'd gotten there, the disengagement had just been negotiated between Egypt in particular and Israel.
Yes.
The short of it is, I decided I wanted to get the Jewish education I never got, although not in the Orthodox vein. I'd begun working that out and decided to go to rabbinical school. I didn't otherwise have any professional ambitions at the time, maybe law school, but went to rabbinical school. And I decided at the end of rabbinical school that my excuse me, that the Jewish education there was lacking. So I went on to get a doctorate at Brandeis University in Jewish thought, and then began working in various aspects of the rabbinate. I'd always wanted to write fiction. At the end of college, I had thought about getting a Master of Fine Arts degree at that point. This is going back a long ways. But the one school I applied to, I didn't get accepted and decided to move off into other things. And I found myself in a small town in northern Arizona as the rabbi. Prescott, Arizona, has a very nice community college, and they were offering a course called Advanced Creative Writing. Took 2 semesters of it, and found that I was both interested and had some talent, and found that there are ways of getting an MFA, a Master of Fine Arts degree, without being in residence. And I got one of those from a school in Louisville called Spalding University. Now that doesn't answer that answers the how or the what, but not the why. One way I like to put it is, Jews like to tell stories, and there are strong storytelling traditions within the Jewish tradition. There's the Midrash tradition, there's the tradition of Hasidic stories, and then we have our own very good contemporary Jewish storytellers. The king and the queen rolled into one person is a woman named Penina Shram, who I became friendly with over the years. And she's a great storyteller and a story writer. And to me, writing fiction is a way of telling a story that is both interesting and amusing, but also has a message of some sort or other. So in getting my Master of Fine Arts degree, I learned what people learn in studying fiction: character, creating a sense of place, theme, dialogue. I say those are the 4 major components of any story, and got better at it, and had begun this novel that I'm talking about during that time in Prescott, Arizona, when I took courses, and then used my time at Spalding University to continue working on it, getting graded for it, and then finished it up pretty quickly afterwards. And we can talk about the novel as we go along, but that's kind of the why of it. It's a way of in my view, continuing a Jewish tradition of being a storyteller. Also, I should say that there are very, very, very many Jewish science fiction writers, going back, more than half a century. Although, when I looked into it, I found that many of those Jewish science fiction writers don't take Jewishness into account so much, but
Yes.
there are very many of them. And there is a growing, by the way, science fiction writers, not just American or North American.
Yeah, you were cut off for a little bit, so can you try to, yeah.
If that happens again, maybe raise your hand. Where did I leave off?
Sorry?
Where do you remember where I left off?
You left
You
off?
said I was cut off, so you
Yes,
left.
when you said there are a lot of them, and then it cut off. A lot of Jewish science fiction
Okay.
authors, yeah.
All right, but there's nothing. No, it's pretty much what I said. There are a lot of Jewish science fiction writers, though they don't take Jewishness into account. There's a nice 2-volume series um, edited by a guy named Jack Dan, D-A-N-N, called Wandering Stars 1 and Wandering Stars 2.
Mm.
And they're both introduced by Isaac Asimov, who, of course, is extraordinarily well, I'm using
Yes,
extraordinarily a lot. He's a well-known science fiction writer. And
yes.
he says in one of the introductions that he's only ever written one science fiction story with a Jewish theme, and it's in one of the 2 volumes. It's not a bad story, actually, but the rest of his oeuvre, which is huge, by the way, the guy wrote 500 books, 500
Yes.
books. Um, he avoids Jewish history, Jewish themes. I imagine him. He died in the early 1980s, so computers had not yet come fully formed yet. I imagine him typing on 2 typewriters simultaneously while dictating to a secretary.
Yes.
I don't know how else a guy could produce 500 books.
Yes.
Extraordinarily prolific.
Yeah, I remember seeing like Jack Kerouac is not a Jew, but he is a kind of honorary Jew with his, ideologies and politics, and he started the hippie movement. If
Right.
anyone listening to, just to clarify, he was the kind of the guru or the founding father of the hippie and beatnik kind of movements. And I remember when he rode On the Road, which everybody ought to know or read at least once, and he printed it out on one big sheet of paper. Yeah.
Right. It was a roll. It was a roll of butcher wrapping paper.
Yeah.
I guess about 12 inches wide or so, and he just put it into his typewriter and just kept writing.
Yeah. So there are a lot of things to cover from what you said, what I glean from what you said. When talking about the Jewish authors in science fiction, well, it's kind of a Jewish tradition to try to make up new stories. The kind of tradition of myth making goes back to, the Breslov, the Rabbi Nachman Breslov, which I like very much. I don't like, what has happened with that movement, how it took shape over the years. And I don't identify myself as a part of that group, but I identify the sentiment. So do you have, Franz Kafka also talked a little bit about his, Rabbi Breslov kind of influence in his writing somewhat. So is there kind of are you influenced by past rabbis or Jewish authors in your writing?
Well, in some inchoate way, the whole Midrashic tradition. First of all, Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav was very influential, not just on Kafka, but on other people as well. And he wrote these wonderful, strange stories he died. He was under 30 when he died. That doesn't mean he wasn't an artist in control of his art, but I suspect that he was a conduit for not just the Jewish tradition, but for kind of a deep psychological insight into human nature. And I'm not, it took a lot of people after he was gone to interpret and understand what he was writing. Kafka, like I say, was just one person. And then, of course, the Bratslaver movement became something. I don't know if Rebbe Nachman came back to life, he would recognize what he wrote. What's come of what he wrote. But one example in the Midrashic tradition that I love telling people about is if you go to chapter 12 of the book of Genesis, and God tells Abraham to go to Canaan and start a life and basically begin the Jewish people, the text tells us that he's 75 years old at that time. And so, so I see a bunch of rabbis on a Shabbos afternoon, maybe 300 of the Common Era, 400 of the Common Era, and they're sitting around and eating gefilte fish or herring and drinking wine or Schlivovitz or whatever it is they drank. And they start talking to each other and they say, 75 years old, what did this guy do for the first 75 years that justifies God telling him and Sarah to pack up and go? They're living in Iraq, basically.
Yes.
And so they create a backstory, a bunch of different stories that comprise Abraham's backstory. And one, I won't go on at any great length about this, but, Abraham is credited with being the founder, if he's the founder of the Jewish people, then he's the founder of monotheism. And so they say his parents, his father must have been an idol maker. He wasn't just some club in the street, but he made idols, and it was rebelling against idolatry and a family that was in the business that brought Abraham to God's attention and made Abraham worthy of this mission that became, of course, extraordinarily important, not just to the Jews. I'm using extraordinarily a lot. Forgive me. I'm not usually that stuck on one word. Not just important to the Jews, but to the Muslims and the Christians as well. So, but then, I have writers that I like. Asimov is one. And Asimov, in a way, figures into this book because although I don't write about robots, although there is a robot or two in the book, his conception of an early conception of artificial intelligence really had an influence on me. And similar writers, but also non-science fiction writers. I wish I could write a sentence, for instance, like Philip Roth. Philip Roth was a remarkable writer. You read a sentence of his, and it's just quite evocative. I don't know. There are other people I like, Dostoevsky, and why Dostoevsky comes up is because, not only did he write really thick novels, but his work has character and it has plot and it has place, but it's also deeply thematic. Saul Bellow is another one. These writers. These writers give someone like me, who's not anywhere at their level, permission not just to write straight, thriller type novels, but to write something that hopefully is good and it's attractive, it's easy to read, but it also talks about things. So those are three writers. Cynthia Ozick is another writer who comes to mind.
Yeah. But she's more on the kind of the Holocaust literature side.
Not entirely, but yeah, she does write about this. She's 92 years old and she's still writing. I just learned 92, 93 years old. And, a number of other writers, not just those, but those are the ones who come immediately to mind.
Yes. Well, wow, this has opened a big kaleidoscope, shall we say, into the kind of niche, but very, very important subject of Judaism and literature, and what is, specifically the kind of Americanized version of Jewish literature, which focuses, on the kind of, the Bronx little detective stories, or the kind of Yiddishists, like Agnon. Of course, you know Agnon. There isn't a Jew on earth who doesn't know him. Also, Bialik, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I would count both of those, but Agnon in particular, as people who have influenced me. One time I read a great deal of Agnon, and in both Hebrew and English. Ursula Le Guin is another name that comes to mind.
Great science fiction writer. Yeah.
And her work always has thematics built into it. It's not just a straight epic type story.
Yeah. So you have a lot of facets to your character. I don't want to minimize your kind of identity whilst we're talking, but just want to, concise. I want to focus us on the topic at hand. Although I like to talk about a lot of things that doesn't matter. I like talking in general because I like to, to get the gears going in my head. Um, so there are a lot of kind of themes that are related to magic, and my podcast is named Thoth the Scribe, which is a kind of a paganistic, rendition of my own view of Judaism, which is, Jewishness, sanctifies or consecrates writing and knowledge, and the storytelling to hand down from generation to generation. And
Right.
this is the same concept. Only I took a superstructure of Egyptian mythology and put it on top of the Jewish tradition, which is on the bottom. Um, on the bottom is a core root kind of influence on me. So can you speak a little bit to the effect of magic and in science fiction, because they're not too separate from each other when it comes to the Jewish context? That's,
Well, let me see if I understand your question. I mean, I'm gonna see if I understand it by answering it. You might be able to translate magic with respect to science fiction in the sense that the science fiction writer is free to create a world that people have to be able to recognize the world. Otherwise, it's incomprehensible. It's
yes.
incoherent. But the world is, contains all kinds of things that are that are different than contemporary reality. So, for example, my book is I call it a soft dystopia. It's not where the world has ended, or there's a or there's a terrible dictatorship afoot. Although I will say, when the sequel, the dystopia gets a little darker, but it's a world in
Yes.
which artificial intelligence has taken several giant steps ahead, while at the same time there's a kind of a rebellion among the machines that's happening, although nothing is as dramatic or violent as in, say, the Terminator movies. But machines become unpredictable. You don't know if the machine is going to do what you want to do. So you're going to get into a driverless Uber, for instance, in this book, and the Uber is going to may drop you off 5 blocks from where it wants you, where you wanted to take, where you wanted to go, where you wanted to go. It's of that nature. So it's a kind of a comical element, but it's also a kind of an element that raises the question about what are we doing with our machines. So if I can talk about it that way, the worlds of science fiction bring into the imagination things that may be imaginable. They may be totally fantastic and totally unimaginable. I'm reading a book now of short stories by H.G. Wells, and in the introduction, the author of the introduction talks about all the things that H.G. Wells predicted, and that's well and good. But of course, the heart of H.G. Wells or any other science fiction writer is not about the predictions of future inventions, but about how humans, when placed in the reality that the author has created, how they behave and what we learn, what they do, what they say, what we learn about them. And so that's not exactly magic, but I think that may have been the kind of thing you were referring to, and it's essential. I mean, it's an essential. Understood that way, it's an essential element of good sci-fi. I mean, all fiction is about world building. It doesn't matter if you write about the present, the past, or the future. All fiction is about world building. But
I'm
future
going to
fiction,
have to disagree with that, but I'll let you talk. Yeah.
well, I mean, well, no, disagree because well, let me tell you what I mean. So let's. I just listened to Jaws in a car on a long car ride. So Jaws takes place in the novel. I guess sometime in the 1970s. And so it's in, it takes place on Long Island, and it takes place in a fictional seaside town in Long Island. So it's got familiar elements, and the familiar elements include a policeman and the government, and people who want to go get a tan on the beach. And so in that sense, it's familiar, but still the author has to create that, has to paint a picture of that so that it's persuasive, and has to create a picture of a killer shark that's persuasive. That's what I mean by world building. And I don't think we could, I can't imagine we disagree about that. The author has to create a picture of whatever the setting is that's persuasive. Otherwise, the reader won't read it.
Yeah, but also you have to, like, in my personal opinion, I think the characters need to be, full, shall we say. They're not flat characters. They should be circular characters, but that's fine.
Well, I mean, I'm not suggesting, I don't know if you're talking about Jaws in particular. I'm not suggesting it's great literature.
No, not in particular, of course, yeah.
But I am suggesting it's a great listen while you're driving 800 miles on the highway. You don't have to concentrate too much. And it holds up in that sense. Plus, I've seen the movie any number of times. I wanted to see how the book compared to the movie.
Yeah, that's an age-old question, although there are books that are so similar to the movie that you say, okay, it doesn't matter, just pick one. Yeah. But talking about kind of magic in movies and science fiction, I wanted to talk, maybe you opened up the kind of field or the possibility to talk about Stanley Kubrick, I think. Has he had any kind of influence on your writing, maybe?
Well, I mean, I guess, did he do anything else science fiction-y than 2001? I'm trying to remember. I've seen several of his movies.
Yes.
One of his first movies was about World War I. The name isn't coming to my head, with Kirk Douglas starring in it.
Yes, on the waterfront, I think.
No, not on the waterfront, and I don't think he directed on the waterfront. This is, but 2000. Look, I was a teenager when 2001 was released, and it was a phenom. There's no doubt about it. And you go and you see it, and you try and figure out what the hell is going on. And Also sprach Zarathustra, the musical, not the Nietzsche.
Yes.
Is at the very beginning.
Yes.
And you got this obelisk, and you've got this very cryptic ending, and you've got Hal the computer who rebels. I mean, I guess so not just in terms of Kubrick or 2001, but there Hal the computer who really he runs amok and scuttles the whole mission. I mean, anybody who's a science fiction reader, writer, or otherwise fan or viewer of movies, that movie was phenomenal. I mean, it was phenomenal. I'm not sure that it survives analysis many years later, but it was just an extraordinarily well-made movie. There I am using extraordinarily again, but also brings to mind Data in Star Trek: The Next Generation, which is much more recent. And there you have a character who probably is not human, but like Pinocchio wanting to be a real boy, Data wants to be a real person. And I think, the way, I don't know how thoughtfully the writers wrote the character in this regard, but I think, the reader is left to believe in the end that he really is kind of human, or he's human enough. And that's how it is with Maggie the computer in my book, who's disembodied, but who wants desperately to be, she believes desperately that she is human. And by the end of the book, the reader, I think, is compelled to agree, as is the protagonist, who fights it throughout the whole book until the very end. And why she crosses over, well, you know, she wants things, she senses things, she's got a sense of humor. You know, her character is well beyond the sort of monotone, limited capacity that we usually ascribe to these kinds of things. And she views herself, oh darn, it'll come, I'm sorry, it'll come to my head. She views herself as Hollywood as an actress, and that image appears on the screen in different photographs that I just found on the internet throughout the novel.
Yeah. Have you ever, by chance, watched Blade Runner?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, like 2001, Blade Runner is really one of those great science fiction movies. And then the sequel, which I can't recall to my head very quickly, but the sequel was also
2049.
Yeah. So you
it
know,
was meh. Yeah.
So I mean, so there what you have are avatars, you know, humanoid characters who look human, and they're so convincing that the you know, the main character, the Harrison Ford character, has to perform a very complicated test on them to determine whether they're human or not.
Yeah.
And they, I mean, what's one of the themes in that thing? They are built to have a limited lifespan, and they really are angry about that. That's one of the points of the movie. It's they have a very limited lifespan, and they have a long, well, at least one of the characters, one of these avatars, has a long memory implanted in her consciousness. But yeah, so that's another place where robots, or some, you know, whatever else you might want to call them, have a large role in a film.
Yeah,
it's a very good film.
You know, people use that kind of term avatar, but they don't know exactly where it stems from. It stems from kind of a Hindu mythology, talking about the kind of maybe the kind of Nephilim in Judaism. So it's similar. There are those kind of demi-goddess and goddesses who, gods and goddesses who drop down to earth to mingle and I forgot that I had a
cohabit. Maybe cohabit, is that?
Coitus. Yeah, it's to perform a coitus with a humanesses, shall we say? And that's what I'm trying to get at when talking about magic. When I say that the myth making in science fiction and world kind of building and creation is not that different to mythology in the ways that kind of minstrels and poets of old would construct a story.
I just had a conversation recently with somebody who pointed out in the first Star Wars movie, I don't know if it goes through the whole series, and I think after the first three, the series became less interesting. But at least in the first one, and I can't cite chapter and verse about the mythology, but it was, the story was created around a mythological structure, or I guess the kind of a classical mythological structure, maybe not a specific myth, but what happens, the arc of a typical myth is what happens in either the whole series or at least the first of the series. And so in that sense, you're right. And also, Star Wars came to mind a moment ago in our conversation, because one thing science fiction does, not necessarily science fiction exclusively, but it has, you know, it arrogates to itself the right to create elements that are fantastic. I mean, you know, probably almost certainly unrealizable, like the Force. You know, but the Force clearly borrows from, you know, from religion in general, religious mythology in general. I wanted to say something about the Nephilim that you mentioned earlier, which they have a mention early in the book of Genesis, but there's a place, and that's in the book of Numbers, when God and Moses send a representative of each of the 12 tribes to the promised land to spy it out. And they come back, and you know, they come back. Two they come back with a bunch of grapes that are so big and heavy that two people have to bear it.
Yes.
And they come and they say, "Whoops, I'm sorry, I apologize." They come and they say, "It's a great land, and look at it, look at the produce." But they say it's a place that would eat us, and we saw the Nephilim there. And everybody goes, "Oh, the Nephilim! Oh my God, we can't go there." And as you know, Nephilim in modern Hebrew means giant, right? And well, it's one
It
word for
has
giant.
it has different connotations. Yeah.
I mean, anak is the primary word, but it has, in modern Hebrew, it has a kind of connotation. And so it tells you that, at least in the mind of the writer, the myth of the Nephilim, which begins in primordial history, is somehow continued. It's perpetrated throughout the generations among the Israelites, so that when they hear, "Oh, the Nephilim are there," oh my God,
Yes.
we can't possibly do that.
Yes.
And that's one of the elements of myth. It sounds like you know a great deal about myth.
Yeah, I like it a lot. That's why I named my podcast "The Fourth Describe," because I identify, with the role or the profession or the trade of an author. So he is the first author, essentially. But you can argue that maybe Gilgamesh was the first kind of author that is named, that has his signature on history, on clay tablets, and not with a quilt pen. But so I would like to continue on this path of mythology with you and talk about the kind of mythological stories that are particularly resonates with your type of writing, or the type of writing you would like to write and create.
I need you to ask that a little more specifically.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what you're asking me.
What are the kind of stories that inform your writing from classical mythology? It doesn't matter if it's Greek or Roman, but mythology that stems from deep aspects of the human mind. Yes.
Well, I mean, my familiarity with mythology really is most characterized by the Jewish stuff, and for which I guess I need to say a quick word, although I don't know who the audience is. But I take the Hebrew Bible very seriously, but I don't take it literally. And I'm a liberal Jew. I'm educated in a liberal Jewish seminary. And so, we take the Bible very seriously. We interpret it, we preach from it, we teach from it. I teach about it, but among other things, it's got great stories, and I love teaching the stories and reflecting on the stories, and so. I can latch on to any one of them, but let's take the Moses story, because it's the most in the 5 books anyway. It's the most fleshed out one, because he's there from the book of Exodus through the end of the book of Deuteronomy. So here's a guy larger than life, who stands on top of Mount Sinai and gets the Torah. Before that, he leads the children of Israel out of Egypt across a sea that mysteriously opens for them, and partly by his agency. He gets the Torah partly by his agency, but yet there is something deeply human about Moses. God confronts Moses at the beginning of the book of Exodus, and God says, "Look, I want you to go. Tell Pharaoh to let my people go." And Moses says, "Me? What are you, crazy? I'm just a little schlepper out here in the desert in Midian. I can't do that." And God has to really persuade him. And by the way, the final persuasion comes when God says to Moses, "And look, I'll send your brother Aaron. Aaron can come and be your spokesman." And then Aaron before. So he's a deeply human character. And in fact, even as he makes miracles and leads people, he gets angry with the people. He has self-doubt. He and he grows. He grows as a character. I mean, that's what you want in any work that has a fictional element. He's not. By the end of the book of Exodus, he's a totally different man than he was, when we first meet him in chapter 2 of the book of Exodus. And at the same time, and here's an undeniable mythological element, and then maybe I can bring this to my book. The story goes that Pharaoh's going to drown all the boys in the Nile. And so Moses' mother gives birth to a boy, and we don't know her name, and we don't know his sister's name, but they're anonymous at that point. Moses' mother puts him in a basket with tar on the bottom and sends him down into the Nile, symbol of life, right? He's down taking a chance, but we, the reader, know that she's not really taking a chance. She may think she's taking a chance, but we know that this is too important for him just to go out into the Nile and starve to death, or the thing turns over and he drowns. And what should happen? But the daughter of the ruler, right, the Pharaoh's daughter, finds him, takes him out, recognizes him as a Jew, and takes him. And before she takes him to the palace, she lets mom nurse him until he's old enough to stop nursing. Now that's all. So he gets the milk of Judaism, you might say, from mom, and then he goes and lives in the palace until he's a teenager, maybe 17, 18 years old. So he goes to a private school, and he studies philosophy and languages, and he's a gourmand, and he knows, and so mythologically, we know he's special from the very beginning. And by the end of the second chapter, it happens very quickly. Sometimes the Bible makes things happen very quickly. We know he's got a Jewish neshama, a Jewish soul, but he's also got an Egyptian education, an Egyptian culture. And this is the guy who's going to lead the children of Israel. And then one more mythological piece. He's out in that desert in Midian, and he sees this bush that's not consumed. So there are two things about that. First of all, the bush, it's not burning up, and that's another, like the two spies with the grapes on, carrying the bunch of grapes, which gets used a lot. It's Israel's logo for its tourist agency. The burning bush becomes a symbol for lots of Jewish organizations, the Jewish Theological Seminary, for one. The bush, so that's miraculous. God is in the bush, the light that doesn't go out. But Moses, maybe that bush has been there for centuries. Who knows? Maybe that bush has been there for centuries. But Moses comes along and he goes, whoa, that bush isn't burning up. I have to stop and see what this is all about. And that's when God calls to him. In fact, before that, before Moses acknowledges this, there's the image of an angel. Angel's good enough for most people. But when Moses recognizes that there's something miraculous, the angel disappears and God is in the bush. So that's all pretty damn good myth making, at least as far as I can tell. And it doesn't translate exactly into my novel, but that kind of thinking, that kind of image, along with many of the other images I've absorbed, are part of what gives me permission. I'll tell you one little piece in the book. By the way, here's my book, Nick Bowen's Underground, and you can join my email list by going to Phil M.Cohen, that's Cohen, philmcohen.com, which I'll probably mention at least one more time. But one night early in the book, the computer Maggie, the AI, says to Nick, tell me about the Golem of Prague. So there's another important Jewish myth. This of course goes well into the Common Era. Although there are many Golem stories, there's the primary one that where the Golem, Judah Low of Prague, creates the Golem as a being that will protect the Jews of Prague, because there's a lot of anti-Semitic activity going on. And so the protagonist, Nick Friedman, who is a college professor of Jewish studies, he goes into professor mode and starts lecturing about the golem. And then he stops and he says, I know you know all of this because as a computer, you know everything. You have access to all kinds of information. And Maggie, the computer, comes back and says, yeah, I know all of this. The golem being a being that does not, manifest full humanity. It runs amok a little bit. Robots running amok is a trope within this kind of literature.
Frankenstein is a kind
Frankenstein.
of, yeah.
It's likely that Mary
Another
Shelley
reincarnation, of the golem.
Yeah, it's likely that Mary Shelley knew the golem story. It was far more. There were a lot of iterations of it, but she stops and they live in Brooklyn, by the way, which is important for what I'm about to say. She says, I'm the golem of Brooklyn. I don't have any body, but my humanity is uncertain. So there's a little piece where I actually bring in a common Jewish myth. So that was long. I hope I didn't go on my time limit, but that's
it's fine. No, it's completely fine. I want to talk, and I want to let the conversation, go on. So let's dive into the book itself after that short introduction, and let's talk about the book. So when did you start writing the book? How did you come up with the characters? Yeah.
Well, I had played around with it for a very long time, partly as a kind of relief when I was writing my doctoral dissertation. But I never took it seriously, although I had written probably 100 pages every time my dissertation got a little tiresome. I turned to this in my little cubby hole in Boston, where my doctoral dissertation, and I let it sit until one day, actually probably a number of years later, certainly 10, 12, 15, even 15 years later, I showed it to a friend of mine who really liked it, and that gave me sort of a boost. And then I revived it again when I was in Prescott, Arizona, which I said earlier. And so there I workshopped it. I workshopped several chapters of it over the 2 semesters that I was there, and it gave me it gave me sort of the encouragement. Now there are 2 kinds of writers. I'm overstating, of course, but there are exactly 2 kinds of writers. There's the kind of writer who can sit down and over the space of a couple of weeks or a couple of months kind of dope out what the book is going to be. Characters, plot, ending, in all those kinds of things, and can even come up with an outline. Now I can do that when I write nonfiction, but my fiction is all by the seat of my pants, and you hear about this. And if you're writing fiction, maybe you have this experience where the characters, not entirely, but in some sense, take on a life of their own. So I had this idea about a tired, aging college professor, and I don't know where that came to my head, but that's how the book goes.
I have no idea. Maybe John Stoner,
he's a guy somewhere in his 60s. The older I got, the older he got as I wrote it. He's not me. There aren't clear autobiographical components, but I still identify with the character. And his evolution is what happens when I keep putting pieces together. I kind of knew the ending early on, but getting to the ending was the challenge. And along the way, I had a publisher who was interested in the book, but who suggested that I had to make certain changes, which I did, and then he didn't take the book anyway. And so in that, I created an underground world beneath New York City, and I gave it the Velvet Underground. One of the things.
Great band. Great band.
There are a lot of cultural references, mostly mostly from within my generation. So right, so he goes down below, and he goes to the Velvet Underground, which actually has a reputation for being a terrible place, but it turns out it isn't, and that's where a lot of the action in the book takes place, which is why it's called Nick Bones Underground, because a lot of the action takes place in this Velvet Underground.
Smart.
He finds he finds a gay coffee shop, where he expects to be, he expects to be torn apart, but he's got to go and get information. And so there's a little bit of world building below the world I built above ground as to what this world looks like, and it'll have a role in the sequel. And the truth is, I can figure out how some of this happens, and I mean here's a little piece. I created this character Maggie, who has very little relationship to anything scientific. She's a human being right from the beginning. She's comic relief. She's also the gal Friday, his trusty assistant.
Great movie.
And also has several significant roles in the book. But in particular, she's very funny. People who read the book tell me that she's their favorite character in the book. She's very funny. But I wanted to be able to give it a mildly credible explanation as to how, when, and why, not why, but how AI could cross the transom into being human. So I called a person I knew in high tech, and I asked him, and he gave me, I mean, he went on and on and on and on and on. And I didn't really need the whole explanation because I'm not there scientifically. But what needs to happen for an AI to take on the characteristics of a human being? And anyway, that's a continuing theme throughout the book, which is not so much about how do machines become human, although that's actually becoming, that is a serious topic on our horizon. But what does it mean for us to be human? What does it mean for a human being to be a human being? What makes us a good person? What makes us a bad person? And then early on, actually, I guess in the second chapter anyway, I create the person who's kind of the villain in the book, and that's Shmuley Shimmer. And I create,
great name, another great name.
And I create a world. They go to yeshiva together in Brooklyn, which is based loosely on the yeshiva de Flatbush, though I never stepped foot in yeshiva de Flatbush. I know people who went there, and so this yeshiva that I concoct has sort of an educational relationship, and so and I don't really it happens intuitively. I guess I can say that without sounding arrogant or fear of contradiction. I'm sort of going through my mind, remembering how I created this or that. It happens intuitively, but then, and as a writer, you undoubtedly have this experience as well. And you finish the text, and then you go through it. You read the whole. You go through the whole text, and you say to yourself, "What the hell is that about? Or how the hell does that fit with this?" And you've either got to create bridges that make sense within the reality of the book, or you get rid of it. This book clocked in at about 110,000 words, which I don't recommend any, by the way. 90,000 is enough for a novel. But it was originally maybe 130,000 words. So I had to get rid of 20,000 words or so. And in scenarios that didn't fit. So revision is really talk about magic. Revision is the magic that makes a discordant work hopefully into a whole, into a coherent whole. And along the way, you say, this doesn't work, that doesn't work, this word's no good, that sentence is no good. I want to add this to the character, take away that from this other character, and so forth. It's I mean, the writing process is really frustrating. It's really anxiety provoking, but it's great fun, and it's my single best besides raising my children.
Yeah. Well, a lot of authors they call their books "my baby," my new
Yeah.
baby, which I believe it, because there are tzirei leida we call in Hebrew, kind of the struggles of kind of childbirth.
Uh-huh.
And so um, I'm thinking about the book, and I wanted to ask you: is it more of a linear kind of story, or does it jump from sequence to sequence without? Um,
Well, the main thrust of it is linear, but
mm,
it has a fair amount of backstory that's fleshed out,
mm,
and in a way, um, also about writing. There are very few rules. There are very few hard and fast rules, except, you know, for the most part, your sentences have to have a subject and a verb. But
yes.
somebody says your writing has to be this way or that way. Um, that advice is usually pretty good, and especially if you're first learning how to write. But then, the rules. The rules can be broken if you know what you're doing and you have faith in what you're doing. So one of the rules is you don't put in too much backstory, but there's a continuing backstory in this that reaches that really factors into what happens when the two main characters eventually meet, and why the protagonist is really deeply angry with Shmuley Shimmer, and why the character himself carries a heavy burden of guilt with him throughout the book, and probably into the sequel for that matter, because the guilt is unresolved. Um, but in that sense, but for the most part, it begins at the beginning and ends at the end, and the whole thing takes place in about the period of about a month.
Yeah. You said he is the kind of a villain, Shmuley Shimmer, but is there a kind of a real villain, or maybe the villain is the kind of downsides of technologies or the disadvantage of AI?
Now, there is another one of the it's important to the story, but one of the subplots, I guess you can call it that, is that this is a bit of a parody of Chabad Hasidism, Chabad Lubavitch. The main character, Nick Friedman, this is one of the backstories. He goes in the senior year of high school. He goes to visit somebody much like the Lubavitcher Rebbe. They're called the Koblener Hasidim,
Mm.
and he gets some advice, which he doesn't take. He gets some advice from the Koblener Rebbe, which he doesn't take, but it sets up a continuing, mostly one-sided relationship between the Rebbe and him. But it's something that Nick Friedman doesn't realize until later in the book. So the Rebbe dies, and he's I try to do my best to create him as a sympathetic and wise character. He doesn't go off quoting texts too much, Hasidic or Talmudic or otherwise, but he's intended to be a good guy, somebody that the reader should respect. But when he dies, what happens to his Hasidim it begins with what happened when the last Lubavitcher Rebbe died, which was that his reputation as having been the Messiah becomes enhanced tremendously. In the book, what happens is the Rebbe is said to return, although you never see him. It's a big fraud, and the reader knows that. I'm not giving away a secret. The reader knows it's a big fraud, but as a result, the person who's leading the fraud takes the Koblener Hasidism and turns it into some cranky New Age religion.
Mhm.
And why I'm telling you this is because they resurrect the Rebbe mechanically, or and he becomes a villain. He becomes a villain,
Yeah.
and he seems to be leading this group into a world takeover. And whether that happens or not, you have to read the book. Really, but there are two confrontations with this virtual Rebbe and the main character. One of them is one of the climax of the book. I forgot how I got off on all of that, but that's a subtext. So we recount in the book how this happened, how it grew, who the new leader is, who the new Rebbe is, and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. So can you please indulge me and read a kind of phrase or a passage from your book that you want to read or is impactful to you or interesting to the readers?
So I hope in the way that I'm describing this, it doesn't sound like it's a disconnected bunch of jazz, because it holds together in the book. But Nick Friedman is a great fan of Bob Dylan. He's a great fan of Bob Dylan, and Bob Dylan, the live Bob Dylan has a very small role in the book as an old man in the library of the new sect. So
Wow.
what Shmuley Shimmer has done, and why I didn't say this, he's disappeared, and Shmuley's father comes to Nick Friedman, who gets the nickname Nick Bones, to find him, because he's created a designer drug that has a very interesting impact. It's like a strong sedative like heroin, but it's also a hallucinogenic like LSD. And in its heyday, it's a very popular drug, and Shmuley Shimmer becomes a billionaire along with his partner Esther Lacey. They become very wealthy. But it turns out that if one takes something like 40 doses of this, that person has a very significant chance of going into an irreversible coma. So he's arrested, tried, sent on the witness relocation program, and he promised his father one text, one telegram, a telephone call, a letter, whatever, just to say he landed, and the call never comes. The father's afraid that he's dead, and he wants Nick Friedman to find him, because Nick has gone part-time into the missing persons business. So in the search, Nick Friedman gets dosed with a triple dose of this drug.
Whoa.
And he's got to figure out how to deal with that. He goes to we don't have these so much anymore because everybody's got their own computers, but what do you call them? A place where you would go to rent a computer if you needed it. And he goes into
internet cafe.
Yeah, internet cafe. Thank you. He goes to an internet cafe. He rents a room with a big computer, and he calls his computer Maggie to come and help him. And he goes under. The drug starts to take its effect. She takes him to a website that's designed to help people who have overdosed on this drug, and he's flying. So I'm going to read, but I like this passage a lot. It helps if you know old Bob Dylan songs, but I decided I'm going to read it anyway because I think it's pretty funny.
Yeah.
So he's been led to believe that he's falling out of an airplane. This is all virtual, and he's got to pull the parachute, the cord of the parachute, for the parachute to open, and he's not doing it. So so here we go. Bob Dylan floated before me. The Bob Dylan of the 1960s, the one pictured on Highway 61 Revisited. Young, skinny, hair every which way, sullen, wearing a flowing blue jacket. In a nasal twang, he said, "Pull the ripcord, Nick, or it's going to be Desolation Row for you." Oh, that song, so dark, but with that faint ray of hope. That's what the song was about, wasn't it? Or was it? Shit, I don't know. That song, like Lurbs, which is the name of the drug, had no meaning, and every meaning all at the same time. Robert Allen Zimmerman wanted me to ripcord. Well, Well then, got to do it. Got to do it for Bob. I made an astounding effort and managed to lift my right hand from my waist to my stomach. No further. Higher, man, Dylan said. To your shoulder. Pull the ripcord or it's going to be you're going to be knocking on heaven's door. Dylan knows. So much wisdom packed into the head of a Jew from Hibbing, Montana. But I couldn't nudge my arm. Head to head now with Bob Dylan. With throaty passion, he said, if you don't do something, Nick, it's all over now, baby blue. Dylan himself was telling me I was going to die. Dylan, the man. Dylan, the voice of a generation or two. Dylan, the Nobel Prize winner. That was enough for me. I made a laborious mental effort and it hurt all over. Come on, Nicky, if you don't pull that thing, there's going to be blood on the tracks. Now shouting. With inexplicable force, with pure will, I pulled at my arm. If a hand could crawl, mine did just that. Like a wounded spider, it edged up my chest to my neck, over to my left shoulder. All the while, it was the 4th of July in my head, and my virtual body was plunging toward an insalubrious end on the hot desert floor. Impossibly, my hand reached my shoulder and felt the ripcord. I managed to get my index finger into it, and I gave a bloodless tug. The parachute opened, yanking me so hard, I rose a little into the cloudless sky. Then I started falling, down, down, down. Not slowly exactly, but not a million miles an hour anymore either. Then wham, I hit the ground. My knees buckled and I fell hard. Unable to use my arms quickly enough to cushion my fall, I scraped my face on the hard desert floor. I lay momentarily on the ground, the blue parachute falling around and over me, covering me like a grandma's quilt. Beneath the parachute, Dylan made his last appearance. Great job, man. Now you're all tangled up in blue.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. It has that kind of, the rhythm also, it has that kind of similar to poetry. Not so much fiction, yeah. It has that.
The whole book isn't like, but thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I want to thank you so much for this amazing talk and your amazing book also, which I can't wait to get my hands on, my greasy little hands, because I love everything fiction. That's the core of my being. I love, surrealist and postmodernist and whatever. Everything that breaks the monotony of the human existence, that lifts the coil, the kind of the coil of the burden of existence and the manacles of, earthliness. And I love everything about what you said about the book and about the inspirations. And I would love to talk with you when the next book comes out, the sequel to Nick Bones Underground.
PhilM.Cohen.com, and you get a free ebook if you sign onto my email list. PhilM.Cohen.com. All right. Well, thank you very much. This is really good questions. I don't do too many of these, but every time I do, the interviewer takes me in different directions.
Yeah. I hope that this was interesting and entertaining to you as it was for me and for you, the audience, who have been watching and listening. And I want to thank you so much and urge you to pick up Phil Cohen's book, Nick Bones Underground, and wait in anticipation till the next installment in this series comes out, and buy that book too. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, not to be too self-promoting, but why else do I go on a podcast except to try to sell my book? So I'll show it again. People like the cover. I think it's a pretty dramatic cover. And you can get to my website by going to Phil M. Cohen, all one word, COHEN.com, Phil M. Cohen, and you get a free ebook with about a half a dozen short stories by me. And I would really appreciative to get your name on my email list. Thank you.